Steyn. Join me as I do interviews with leaders in the field of artificial intelligence from across the world. We speak about the business relevance of artificial intelligence, and we also speak about the future. Is it to be feared or to be embraced? Please subscribe at my website for updates on future interviews. Today I'm joined by Jennifer Fischer in New York. She has a wealth of technology experience in the academia and corporate sectors and is a frequent speaker on topics related to applied digital ethics and intelligent technologies. Jennifer is an executive director and faculty member at Felician University and faculty advisor at Girls Who Code. We touched on many interesting and very important topics such as educating and mentoring the workforce of tomorrow, diversity and inclusion, bias and facial recognition, and also on what corporate leaders should consider when embarking on an artificial intelligence journey. Welcome. We have all much to learn from people like Jennifer, and I invite you to listen in on our conversation. Joining us today from New York is Jennifer Fischer. Jennifer, welcome. I've got this much on your profile, on your LinkedIn profile, that I dread this conversation because it's going to take 4 hours to get through all the stuff that you're doing, that you have been doing. But I'm very honored to have you here. I think there's so many things you're involved in that's relevant to the conversations I want to have in these interviews. So the question I've asked some of the guests is, and it's a horrible, almost impossible question, is we are at a cocktail party and you've got 2 minutes and I say, "Hi Jennifer, so what do you do for a living?" How would you answer that question?
That is a difficult question to answer. So over time, it's changed a bit, right? So I've been in the corporate sector for most of my career, in industry and in Big Four management consulting. I'd say my specialization areas there have been in technology and transformation and risk. But I've always had a dual career. I always loved teaching, and so I started teaching as an adjunct many, many years ago and continued with that. And just this past year, in fact, made a career pivot to academia full-time. So that was a big change for me to go from corporate to academia. So my role now is also a bit varied. I still teach, right? So as a faculty member, I teach courses in digital ethics. And the scope is pretty broad. So, we cover everything from digital business to privacy and bias and cyber risk and regulatory compliance, techno-social engineering, lots of interesting discussions in the courses. I'm also an executive director with the university. And there, my role is more about focusing on building partnerships for the university, both public and private, and specializing there in areas of ethical AI, digital citizenship, and future of work. And then, of course, I have some extracurriculars. So I serve on a number of boards and committees and working groups, and often get involved in policy discussions around shaping local issues, right, economic issues in our local area, as well as issues around diversity in STEM. So I've been an advocate for women in IT, women in cyber, women in risk for many years, and so I continue with that and have broadened that a bit to a number of different areas of diversity and inclusion. And I think that's pretty much the scope of what I do.
That's it. I was biting my time because I wanted to interrupt you every 5 seconds to say, "Tell us more about that. Tell us more about that." But we'll get through that. So I think let's talk about your career in consulting and in business,
Sure.
especially as it relates to these kind of technologies. What I find in the work I'm doing, which is a lot in the banking sector, is that people still don't really get what AI and machine learning and RPA and all those things are about, and I think it's a silver bullet that's just going to solve all their problems. I don't know, hopefully they've matured over the years, but what have you found
when it comes to dealing with corporate customers in this kind of technology? What's your experience?
I think it's, I agree with you. I've found the same thing. I think people, hear a lot of the hype and they get excited about the capabilities and the potential around AI and machine learning and deep learning, and they're sort of ready to rush in thinking that this is going to, solve all their issues. And sometimes, it could be just more of a process automation issue that could be handled in a simpler way that they just, haven't recognized. But I think also, from my experience, there's a real interest in harvesting and leveraging data and sort of the complexities around that. So you've got really a shift in terms of the business model for the 21st century, where people are really looking to take the data that they've collected for any number of reasons and monetize it or create products and services out of that data, right? So I found a lot of issues there. From a global perspective, certainly, trying to balance all of the different regulatory regimes in secondary use of data is very, very complex. So that seems to be an area where a lot of people they have a vision for what they'd like to do, but not necessarily a roadmap for how to get there.
That's a good answer. And now you bring us to data and privacy, bias, and all those things. My son is 6 years old, and he already has this massive digital footprint. Because, I'm quite private on my Facebook page. I think I've got like 32 friends because they are really good friends and they are scattered all over the world. So I do post a lot about him and growing up and those things. And he's recently learned to use my Google Home and obviously Siri. And he's just living in this world where he's got this digital footprint almost from birth. So I wonder when he's 18 or older, if we think it's a massive issue now, I mean, imagine for future generations what it would be like. So we have to make sure we do it right for them, Bias in particular, the whole thing of facial recognition, which is such a relevant and hot topic at the moment, given what's happening in the US and in the world, So what would your thoughts be on that, can of worms?
On facial recognition?
And on ethics and data and privacy. I mean, it's a big ask for a short answer.
So, from a facial recognition standpoint, I think that the technology has potential usefulness. I think the big problem that we've seen is that it's been deployed too soon. So before adequate testing has been done, particularly around bias and on really readiness for market, I think the launch of many of these tools has been premature. So from that standpoint, I think a lot of my colleagues are calling for bans on the technology. I don't know if I'd go that far. I'd say that there's definitely a need to hold back on its use until it's been sufficiently tested and matured. But do I think that potentially, if it can save lives in terms of preventing an attack, I think it can be useful. So I'm a little bit jury's out on the facial recognition piece yet until to see really where it can go in an appropriate way. Data, and you mentioned a really interesting scenario, right? With being a child and having so much data out there and available about you, and how it might be used in the future, both to with your consent and or without your consent, and that's where I think it gets a little dangerous. If we're talking about people who are willingly sharing information, and that can be images, it can be the whole, all different types of data. I think there's an innocence about distributing that, but not necessarily thinking about all of the malicious actors who might be trying to use it in a different way. And so, having been in the cyber risk world for a bit as well, it's amazing to see, how much information that's out there from a purely innocent, transaction can be taken and used for identity theft, for other types of nefarious purposes. And so, it's interesting. It's also, from a purely philosophical standpoint, a question of should a child have, some say in whether or not that information is shared about them, as opposed to, parents making decisions for them and assuming that they'd be okay with that. So there's a bit of a challenge there as well.
It's a huge topic. I recently read a big piece about pedophiles and predators, and especially now with the whole lockdown situation worldwide, how it's increased. And for instance, my child can confide in my Google Home Mini or my Alexa. For instance, Lego has some amazing natural language processing products where children can ask them to tell them stories and while they're building their blocks. But now the child starts confiding in the AI, and it's information, familiar information that predators can use in luring them. So as a parent, I'm shuddering thinking about that, And then there's also all the good that this technology can do, which is this paradox that we're living with, I often say,
exactly.
We talk about implants. If I can find my child, if he goes missing very quickly, I would love for him to have an implant. If the implant can detect cancer or another sickness way before doctors can, I'd love for him to have it. But then you think of an Orwellian world almost, and privacy issues and those kind of things, and it makes it difficult to decide what to do. And like you say, what if the child could choose? What would he or she do? Never actually really thought about that, to be honest with you. Is what would the child say? And how do I explain it to him even? Given that he's 6 and what it can do to him. So, wow, that's a big topic. So I want to just stick a bit with the whole corporate thing. And we spoke about data. I think a lot of organizations have done a lot to improve their own technology stacks and their own data and upskilling their own workforces, but a lot of organizations are still very far behind. If business leaders are looking at this talk and they're embarking on this journey to become call it an AI-ready organization, or to really start using machine learning and those things, what are the pitfalls in your experience that they need to look out for? What are the first steps they need to take?
Well, I think business leaders have a very interesting dilemma, because, certainly I grew up and came of age in an era of, faster, better, cheaper. And, if you can automate it, you should. But I think when we think about the future of work, it's very important to look at all of the different dimensions that are involved. And so in some ways, we know that taking that step and perhaps introducing, whether it's, a physical robot, or whether it's just automated processing that has intelligence within it, we know that it can be tremendously beneficial from a business standpoint. But I think the question really has to become, how does that impact? It's got to be a balance, right? On the one hand, you want to be competitive and innovative, and you want to, perhaps be progressive in your business. At the same time, it's definitely impacting your workforce. So there are some considerations around what that new business entity might look like. And before people rush to replace human jobs, I think that's a consideration that they need to come to terms with. If it's a matter of to me, if I were in that position and there's an overwhelming benefit to having that automation, then certainly I would look to invest in upskilling, reskilling, or outskilling to be able to maintain a way of life for those people that are being displaced.
It's an ethical responsibility, I think. And it's I think so easy to sit somewhere on the 17th floor and look at a spreadsheet and just make a decision that impacts so many people's lives. It's almost easier to make that decision, because if you have to look them in the eyes, and if you have had gotten to know their families, it's an impossible decision to make. And I've spoken on this forum often about, I think it's Nick Bostrom who speaks about us creating what he calls the useless class. in that we're not able in this industrial revolution now to upskill people, and we'll might in the years to come find people who literally can't do anything unless they do plumbing or carpentry or something like that, which we'll most likely still need, But from a knowledge worker point of view, I'm an optimist more than a pessimist with this technology, but I think that the clarion call is not loud enough about how quickly we have to upskill people, and which brings me to education, because I even think globally in our educational systems, there has been some progress, but I don't know if we are training our children for the future, maybe because we're not quite sure exactly what they're going to be doing in 10 or 15 years, And you're doing a lot in education, and I know you're passionate about that. So, I'm a parent, or if you're a teacher, what should we do? What should we look out for? I don't know if there are answers. What would you say?
Well, I think that it's a very complicated question, because there's sort of multiple levels to that. On the one hand, I think part of the reason people aren't there are digital skills. Certainly, young people are very comfortable with. They're not intimidated by technology. That they tend to like it, and so it is incorporated, I think, into education growing up. But I think what sometimes gets lost is the human capability surrounding the implications of that technology. And certainly, as a child, it's not the easiest thing, but frankly, that's the reason why I made the career pivot. I really felt compelled. I was teaching as an adjunct, and I was enjoying it, but I was challenged by a number of students who they embraced the technology. They certainly were enthusiastic about it. My courses are required, by the way, for computer science and cyber students, so I do get others. But that those students you would assume would be enthusiastic about the technology, and that wasn't a surprise to me. But when it came to thinking through all of the different implications of introducing the technology, and from a political point of view, an economic point of view, across the board, they really weren't asked to think about that before. And so, to me, I see the biggest educational need is the critical thinking skills that go along with the technology, because the mechanics is fine. They're going to learn that, and languages are going to evolve over time, and they're going to learn new programming languages and be competitive in their space, and that's great. But those core foundational skills around critical thinking and how to really assess the implications of the technology are something that, to me, without those, it's perilous. And so I really just felt like this was a calling for me to get engaged with them, and really, in some ways, sort of disrupt their mode of thinking and what their current expectations and what they've been told so far or not told so far. Just being able to question and to pose questions about what they're doing and how it might affect their children and future generations. So I think education has a huge role to play in this.
I think this technology is making our children lazy to think for themselves, because you just Google it. You don't have to think about it.
Yeah. I think that's true. I think, and that's definitely one of the trade-offs with technosocial engineering, right? So because you become, very comfortable with any given technology performing a certain act for you, and in a sense, you're outsourcing that function, to it. There's really no need for you to do it. But when it comes to thinking, that's where I think we always have to keep ourselves in check, because fundamentally, that's where I think that the entire potential for the greatness of AI can go wrong. if we allow ourselves to simply, go with automation bias, because the data shows it's got to be right, and I don't have to think about it. That's a very slippery slope.
You just made me think of something. I almost always use Waze in my car, even if I'm just driving around the corner. I don't know. I like the tech, and there might be an accident and traffic, and I might not have known it. And my son often asks me, "What am I doing with this thing? And then why?" And he always tells me he knows shortcuts. And why am I listening to Waze? Which I don't know, for some reason reminded me about it. The thinking of maybe there is a better road to take, rather than blindly just following what this AI is telling me where to go. Because he's just thinking, why am I following the screen? He knows that's a better road. Now, he might be right or wrong. But yeah, I'm almost a slave to the music, so to speak, when it comes to this technology. Something else I saw in your profile is the Girls Who Code involvement. A few months back, I was involved in a local, it was a global event, but locally here in Johannesburg, an event called Girls in AI, where we were mentors in a school. It was quite a kind of a prosperous, well-off school, but half the audience of teenage girls were from underprivileged backgrounds, and we mixed them all up in groups, and there we taught them the basics of design thinking and spoke about the future and all that. And what really got to me that day is that, the girls in my group and around the table, especially the ones from extremely poor backgrounds, were some of the smartest people I ever met. So smart. And there is a good chance that they would never have a good, proper job, or just be almost forced into some menial labor. Not that I'm degrading that. I think all work is honorable, but what got to me is that the future of the world, and in our country in particular, is in these youngsters. And they might never reach, because of the situation they're in, their potential. So it's something that I've always been passionate about it, but it really opened my eyes. And especially when it comes to minorities and the role of women, which we've progressed a lot in the last, say, 40 years, but sometimes I look at corporate boardrooms and I think we're nowhere. So this is a whole separate conversation, but I'd love to talk to you about it, with the work you're doing within the Girls Who Code, and just working with young female leaders and things like that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, and we have made tremendous strides, but it wasn't so long ago, maybe just a year and a half or 2 years ago, when we would assemble a group of IT executives from around the world, and I'd be the only female in there, and so that doesn't, it's not a horrible thing to be the first or to be an only. I'm comfortable enough in my skin to sort of hold my own. But certainly the encouragement that younger women really need in terms of role modeling, I think is where I see organizations like Girls Who Code, playing a big role. Helping them to make connections, helping them to really see themselves in that role, whether they choose to, pursue that type of a career or not. It's certainly exposing them to design, to coding skills, and so we, I'm not sure if you're very familiar with how that organization works, but essentially, you don't have to have coding skills to join. You can just be, interested and, come in and others will work with you and coach you and mentor you so that you develop those skills. And so it really is a nice way to sort of democratize that skill set, particularly around AI. And because so many, future jobs are in the tech space, it's just another tool that young woman can have to, demonstrate employability. So to me, it's a win-win all around. There are a number of organizations I work with like that. The other significant one is International Consortium of Minority Cybersecurity Professionals, and very, very similar type of mission where, it's about role modeling. It's about accessibility. It's about making sure that, kids can really see themselves in these professions and have mentors that they can work with on, any number of levels. But, just having that person who's not an authority figure, right? It's not their professor, it's not their parent, but it's a professional who cares enough about their future career success to, be willing to spend that time mentoring them and sort of helping them develop, soft skills, professional skills, and making sure that they are workforce ready. Those organizations are amazing for the work that they do, and I'm really, really proud to be a part of both of them.
Well done for that. I think, for me, what you're alluding to now is those youngsters need the right examples. And especially if it is somebody like them, in that they might come from a poor background or minority background, and it's somebody who's made it or were successful, because they won't get that kind of mentoring in their home, or sometimes not even in their community, or churches or whatever. So I think that I don't think we realize what an impact it has on their future to just spend some time. And you know what, if you're somewhat okay in your career, giving money is the easiest thing to do. It's giving time, right, which is very difficult, So well done on that, Jennifer. And I'd love to do a panel discussion with you. We spoke about Renee Cummings earlier, whom you know,
sure,
and others. Just have a bunch of women on the call, and I'll be the guy just holding my mouth listening, but I'll direct it a little bit because it's a very relevant topic. Before we end off, you also do public speaking. So is that, apart from obviously the academia side of it, but is it at conferences, lecturing? So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, it's been pretty much a mix of both. Over the years, it's been different industry groups when it's appropriate. Obviously, more recently, it's been invitations, from academic organizations. But there are a number of, it's been an interesting, few months because of the whole COVID situation. And so a lot of the conference presentations that I was even planning to engage in the fall, I'm not really sure if they're going forward or not. So it's a little bit of a wait and see, I think, at this point. But yeah, I love to work with different audiences. I'm fortunate that I am as comfortable with an academic audience as a business audience. So, I can sort of, span both worlds, and perhaps, share across those worlds, which is kind of interesting for me.
I've done a lot of public speaking conferences, and recently it's obviously all on Zoom or Teams or whatever. And I wanted to just ask you about this because I really thrive off the vibe of the audience. When you see them, they're sitting in front of you, and you can know whether it's really going bad or really going well. But now you're essentially looking at your own face in the screen when you're talking. You're looking at your own slides. I've done a few webinars in the last few months. I find it daunting. I don't know if you've done any and how you've experienced it.
Yeah, it's definitely different. We also had to move all of our classes online, and so again, online education is great, but I think when someone's choosing it, if you're choosing to go to a webinar or if you're choosing to take an online course, you know what you're signing up for, and it's a little bit different when you're, it's sort of crashing into it. There's all kinds of sort of distractions and other things that are going on, and the students are trying to sort of manage what's going on in their family home, and but still pay attention, and the same for speaking. I think for some, I'm used to having been working in a global environment for a long time. I'm very used to conference calls and Zoom calls and that kind of thing because it was, how we would run our team globally. But I think for most people, there is a little bit of a loss of that social interaction, particularly in the networking space. So one of the key things about conferences is, being able to go there and meet with people, have that social interaction, and, talk about things that might be a little bit, off the topic of what was the, what the presentation was about, or, talk about a scenario that someone's experiencing personally within their workplace, and dig a little deeper into that. So I do miss that. It's definitely been a little bit different. But at the same time, we gained some time back in our day. So I'm very grateful for that. Just the ability to manage most of my work from the desktop, has allowed me to accomplish more in a day. And so, that's always a good thing.
Just the time that one saves on travel, even if it's just to your day job, but never mind flying across country or to another country to speak at conferences. Mm-hmm. And it's not that stress of booking flights and arriving at a hotel. And, I personally don't really love living in a hotel. I miss just making a sandwich. I don't want to eat all the smart food all the day, So I actually love it, even though it's weird not to see the people. But Jennifer, there's so much I'd love to continue talking about. So in a few weeks, depending on your availability, I think the work that you're doing, especially, when it comes to the Girls Who Code, and the work you're doing from an academic point of view, keep on doing it. I want to encourage you, and there's a lot of people who need to hear what you have to say, and the world needs this message. This tech is exciting, and we need to be careful, but we can give our children a better future if we do this right. So you're doing important things, and thank you for your time and for this really lovely conversation.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure, and I look forward to, hopefully we can reconnect soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.